officially beautiful. Back on. So
Okay,
yeah.
Okay,
Go ahead.
Sorry. Before we start, the cockroach was right here, like at the beginning. And it was like crawling right here. And I was like,
what do I do?
huh.
She picked up her feet.
Pretty close to your feet,
She
Chris.
picked up her feet.
Pretty close to your feet, but I was like, this is just happening. And then I saw it crawl around, and then I saw it come out from under Mark's chair. And I was just
I
like...
didn't see it till it was at the door.
And
I saw it over there.
I remained so calm.
I didn't see it till it was right by Kellie's head.
It had already done all that. Yeah.
At that point, I was like, well...
Mark,
And
thank
he's
you
still
for
here, so.
rescuing it.
Yeah, it's still right there, but it's not going to move from that spot.
Well, no.
Until someone does. But
I
yes.
gotta move it because Kellie
Well, I keep looking at it, just wondering if it's going to wiggle a little or something, and it doesn't. But
That's what it felt like to
Mark,
shoot the
does
woodchuck.
your foot need
I just wiped it on the rug.
He definitely wiped it on your rug. Definitely did that.
You know, that's okay considering you saved this from.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I figure, it's part of the price you pay for, extermination.
It's a little bit of extermination juice on the road.
Exactly. Yes.
All right.
All right, we ready? Welcome to How I See It with me, Mark Pratt, and
Justin Sternberg. This is a podcast that works to counter cultural polarization through thoughtful conversations.
So, Mrs. P, sorry, didn't mean to do that clap right there for editing purposes. There you go. But, Mrs. P, in that process of intergenerational learning, I think it's interesting as you bring that up and how our culture has shifted. Because I think even on the other end of that, we have a whole generation of people who are uncomfortable with young people. We separate, the curmudgeon comes to mind, and even in our, I would say at times in our church settings, it's like babies crying is a terrible thing,
Uncomfortable.
Well, yeah, some would see it as terrible.
Sure.
Just because it's like...
It's interruptive.
Yes. Mm-hmm. What's that kid doing in here?
Someone's not going to get the word of God in their heart because...
Yes.
Which...
And I hear again, this is how
That's
I
how
see
you
it.
see it.
Exactly. As I move my hands through the air as I'm juggling balls. But, it's that this is how I see it. And I think, we have missed out. I think it's a great point you bring up at times. Yeah, well, you bring up great points all the times, but in that era of, okay, kids go here, adults go here, junior high goes here, and I think there is a part we're missing out on.
There was a teacher, a specific teacher at Southport Elementary when I was there, who intentionally sought out grandfather type men to come into her classroom once a week and would invest in those boys in that classroom. I mean, and they were... maybe veterans. I mean, they had so much to offer, but that did so much more than just give her a helping hand. I mean, it brought a new experience to those boys. Yeah. It made that comfortability between the generations easier. There wasn't this fear from the younger boys to, okay, this man, I don't know who he is. I mean, it just developed a relationship. I loved that she did that. And she did it with one of the gentlemen passed away, and she, within a few months, found somebody else, found somebody else to come in and serve that role. And I just love, and that was one of our neighbors, the guy across the street. He was actually one of her helpers, and it was good for him too. Yeah. Right?
No doubt.
Yeah. Gave him purpose and gave him this opportunity to invest in the next generation.
Yeah.
So.
And I think it even adds to that storytelling. I think we've lost some of that storytelling dynamic in our culture as, that intergenerational dynamic has fallen away, and it is a loss.
Mm-hmm. It is a loss.
Yeah.
And I think too, like teaching our kids like the art of like good conversation and like when someone's sitting in front of you, especially someone who's older, like they've got a lot of cool things that they've done with their life, so teaching our children to be like, even if in their youthfulness they might say like, so were you alive when there was no telephones, like things like that, like like maybe they're talking to Uncle Justin when they say that, like, Uncle Justin, you're pretty old, tell us about when you were a child. And
how was
people
the
went
ice
around
age anyway?
Yeah, but I feel like that's, like, for them to realize, like, man, if I can have conversations with people, like, I can learn so much too. And definitely, I mean, I feel like they can always learn in any conversation, but I feel like especially with people that are older than them, to, like, learn from their experience and hear about what they did with their lives. And, like, I feel like I missed out on that, like, in the aspect of, like, my grandparents and things. Like, I never took advantage of hearing more about their lives and, like, what they did, and, like, their time in the service, and just like the way that life was when they grew up. Like, I wish I would have done that, you know. And I didn't, you know. So I think teaching them that is, I think, a pretty cool thing too, for them
that emotional intelligence is something that's not given enough credit or enough focus, and makes me think of, you know, when I have a conversation with a young, let's say middle school or so I work with middle schoolers.
Bless you.
So I am always impressed. I have a couple in my class who come to mind immediately. I'm always impressed. I'll come in, you know, we'll do a little chatter, and a couple of them will always say, "Miss Pratt, how was your day?" Like, when they reach out to me and they ask questions, instead of me always being the one to offer or probe or question or whatever, I find that very interesting, and I wonder, how did the parent foster that?
Yes.
That confidence? Maybe, is it a confidence, or is it just a care, a compassion for people? It could be a lot of things. A curiosity. But I always think, wow, that is such a good quality. They're not intimidated by me being older. You know, they're comfortable and they are caring. And so that's
so good.
maybe one of my gauges about kids, or when I meet kids, or when I, you know, talk with kids. It's like, are they able to carry on a conversation back and forth?
Yeah.
Or is it always one-sided?
It's funny you bring up emotional intelligence because once when one of the first episodes, you seen Another Bug?
No.
All right.
We're good.
Mark the Killers
That's
on
the chord I was thinking. Chris, you can pull that up. There you go. If you need a little more. There you go.
Thank you.
Perfect. As one of the first episodes we recorded, I made a joke kind of thing about homeschoolers and their lack of emotional intelligence.
Oh, we know.
Oh,
we know you made that joke.
All the homeschool listeners are angry at me. The funny thing about it was, and I think this would be maybe a good transition to talk about.
That's a
our
great
upbringing.
That's a great transition.
Yeah. I would love to hear from each of you, like, how you were schooled through high school, basically. But for me, I was homeschooled, and I lacked emotional intelligence. So when I told that story, I was thinking of me entering 6th grade in a Christian school from being homeschooled, and how rough it was. And, like, I was made fun of, and I was the nerd, and I didn't know how to deal. I didn't have the emotional intelligence that I then had to learn. So I went to, it's very confusing. I did homeschool for kindergarten. And my mom said, I can't do this. And I don't blame her, because I was a handful at that age. And so for a year, I didn't do anything. So I did homeschool, kindergarten, then nothing. And then I went to a Christian school for 1st and 2nd grade and 3rd grade. And then they pulled us out. No, and 4th grade. They pulled us out. We did homeschool for 5th grade. And then I went back to a Christian school from 6th grade all the way to the high school, right? So,
wow.
Yeah. So I kind of had a storied school career. Not really. I mean, it was mostly a Christian school and a little bit of homeschool splashed in there.
Yeah.
How about you, Mark? What was your story?
My story is not nearly so complicated. Long story short, I grew up my elementary school, I could walk there.
Oh, cool.
And if I missed the bus, you know, that was what I had to do back in that day. It was, you had to walk. You know, there's many stories that go along with that, as far as whether I did or whether I didn't walk some days. But
because the fishing hole between your house and
you could always count on a neighbor going by. You could always hop in, you know, and then you know. But it was a different era. But there were many times I did have to walk. Yes. And then I went into town, as we called it, you know, for middle school, whatever, elementary school, that kind of thing. And then I graduated from that same public school, you know. And I think for me, education, the education and learning wasn't something I did well early on, and I
not a passion topic for Mark.
Well, it is, but it's something I did.
Not.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, my poor brother and mother, they were not sure that I was gonna make it through elementary school. You know, just because of my grades and so forth. At that point, it's still kind of one of those family dynamics that I wrestle with at times. But yet, I have come to appreciate, you know, education, but I also recognize how, as you mentioned, being a handful, you know, and I respect, you know, as you share, and I think of John early on, it's like educating boys and educating girls is quite often two separate things, you know, from a developmental standpoint. And so I really do appreciate, you know, the teachers who were able to, you know, decipher that difference for me. And I can, and no offense to you ladies, I think about, you know, I'm also thinking about, you know, growing up, the men, the as you mentioned, Jackson, you know, the male teachers that I had, and how formative they were for me in creating a, you know, a rigid structure that I needed. You know, I needed a little fear of God in me at times. You know, I'm not saying it's all about that, but yet there is that part where, no, you can do this, and you may need to buckle in a little more, you know, whereas, you know, other people I was a little more able to manipulate, even, if you will. You know, I can't do this, you know, and I can remember being inspired or called out, kind of, you know, as you were sharing, you know, pursuing that upper level. I can remember the teachers who called that out of me, you know, in that early age. So yeah, that's kind of small.
And just as an aside, I think, again, Mark homeschooled John for 2 years, and I think in middle school years, 6th and 7th grade, I am so grateful. I'm so grateful. Yeah. Not only for those, don't start crying there, Mark, but the relationship that was forged between Mark and John during those years prepared them for what was coming for the high school years. I mean, that relationship with father and son would not be what it is today without those years. And I'm not saying it's anything that we did. I feel like God put his hand on our decisions, and he knew what was coming, and he knew what we needed. And if I had been the homeschooler, if I had been the one educating, we would have missed out so much on the relationship that John and Mark have. So that's an aside.
That's an aside.
It's good.
So make that part of your school.
Yeah, dads, get involved. Dads,
Yeah, that's good.
absolutely.
Truly.
Yes.
That's so good.
Yeah.
So to summarize Mark's, basically it was, I would say, the traditional path, right?
Yes,
like
very much
one
so.
school, basically one school system, top to bottom.
Yep, one county.
Good or bad, whatever that system was, that's what you were in. And,
one local school district.
Very
Cool.
small community, though. Everybody knew everybody.
Got you.
Yeah.
Which I think has value. Again, the intergenerational dynamic was very present in his education.
I would say it was present in mine as well, because our Christian school was, all of the high school was 7th grade all the way up to seniors, right? So we were all in the same quote-unquote high school, and we would interact in a lot of ways and do plays together, or sports together, because you didn't have enough to have just a high school team. Usually we would have some. Yeah, so a lot of that I mean, that's not really intergenerational, but even that blend I felt like was healthy for my emotional intelligence. But.
No doubt.
But I feel like Mark's experience is truly intergenerational. When I first met him, and he could I mean, a lot of his friends were 2 generations ahead of him. And I was just, wow, this is interesting.
You're an old soul.
Old soul. and I think about it too, even in... As I had 5 in the elementary, you know, kindergarten through 4th grade, my parents had social interaction with 3 out. They definitely knew all 5, but there was an ongoing social interaction between my parents and 3 out of 5 of those teachers. You know, to where whether it was church or whether it was work environment, you know, it's like that definitely had some inspiration, you know, because you knew it wasn't I could get away with it. You know what I'm saying? There was going to be a conversation, you know, and it wasn't
and your parents knew them ethically and morally. Like they could trust your education to those people.
True.
They knew them. They knew their values. So, which is very different from our education, public education today.
Yeah. There's more stories that could go along with
Oh,
that.
yeah.
But
Okay.
yes.
Let's get
Yes.
Yeah.
That's good.
Moving on, Kelly. Your experience.
Yes. Okay. So for me, I went to a private school, the same private school as Justin, actually, from kindergarten to, I believe it was 4th grade. Mom, if you're listening, maybe it was 5th. I can't remember. I think it was 4th grade though.
She'll tell us.
Anyways,
we'll put it in the show notes.
Maybe it was 5th. Yeah. Yes. And then we decided to go and homeschool at that point. And the main reason we decided to do that was my brother and I at the time were just not being super challenged in the school setting that we were in. And my mom just felt like, she was like, hey, if you guys want to do this, I think we should do this. And they did kind of, I feel like they let us decide. Maybe they just made us think we were deciding. I don't know. It worked. And so yeah, at that point I was, middle school age. And so it was pretty self-driven, my homeschooling career. My mom was very involved and helpful, but most of the learning I did was pretty independent learning. And then we moved here to North Carolina. And when I was in 9th grade, I started taking college classes at the community college. They allow homeschool students to do that, and it was free. I just had to pay for books. And so then when I graduated from high school, I graduated with a 2-year degree, associates in business degree. And so that was a great experience for me. I don't have any really big negatives. There was a season where it was hard that my mom was also my teacher and my mom. We had like a year that I was like, I couldn't put words to it. I think it was maybe my 7th grade year, but it was like, I really didn't want her to be my teacher and my mom. Like it was too much. It was too hard to have her telling me what to do on so many fronts in my life. And so we definitely wrestled with that but came out the other end better, and so I think it was worth the wrestling, and really it was just me being a little bit of a punk. And so I eventually got over it and realized that my mom was just looking out for me. So that was my experience.
I appreciate even that, if I may, too, and I think as a form of encouragement, recognizing that there will be seasons too.
Yes.
In this educational learning process, I think, as you mentioned, the kids are older, but, there's seasons that go along with that. And as parents, not giving up in that process, because our kids aren't going to be, they'll be full of energy most of their lives, but, there's not going to always be that hyperactive type movement of the younger, and it does settle into something, in direction. And just as an encouragement, from that, thinking of your personal experience, there will be that punk stage, but there's hope. They grow out of it, and each stage, I think it's helpful if you can just remember that, this is a season, and being able to stay steadfast in that.
Yes, for sure. Yeah. And as a homeschool parent, realizing too that it is really hard that you are the parent and the teacher. Because I even feel that sometimes, like, it's just, there's a lot of direction happening, And so to give yourself grace in that, and also to give your child grace and realize, like, you're expecting a lot from them, and that's okay, and that's good and healthy, but it also is a lot, So, What about you, Chris?
So I am a product of public education, kindergarten through 12th grade. My early year, actually all the way up through 11th grade. So 1st grade through 11th grade, I was in a small district in upstate New York, and very not cutting edge necessarily, but they did things well. Excellence. It was a school of excellence. It was a district of excellence. And I can remember in 2nd grade, my teacher would challenge us, and we learned sign language that year. Because, there were a group of us that, felt like we needed a little more challenge. And so she said, instead of doing the spelling words normal, you're going to do them in sign language. And so I felt that there was that creativity all the way up through that that was a wonderful district to grow up in. It was small enough that I was given leadership opportunities, and so yeah, a lot of great things happened. And then my junior year, my dad lost his job, so we moved to a back to where my grandparents were, an hour and a half away, to a much larger district. And so I was in my senior year, I was thrown into this huge school. Not a great experience. I could tell stories about that as well, but so I feel like if I had grown up in that large district all of those other years, I would have been a completely different person. I wouldn't have had the leadership opportunities. Everything would have been kind of right by the book, or the state curriculum, which, is questionable sometimes. But again, with God's providence and sovereignty, I am just grateful for that experience of where he placed me in my formative years, educationally speaking. Wonderful teachers. I didn't have the same experience with Mark in the sense that it was a larger district, so my parents didn't know my teachers personally, but very positive.
I think it's interesting, and one of the reasons I wanted to get each person's background is just to see like how different our educational experiences can be, and yet still be in the same room having the same conversation. And I think that's really important for parents to understand, which is one of the premises you started with, both of you, which is it's about doing what's best for your family, right? And so, and there's going to be, and then Mark, you mentioned seasons. It's not a one-size-fits-all situation for every kid, for every family, for every season. And I think it's important to do the work to figure out what makes sense in whatever season you're in, for whatever child you're dealing with. And also know that it's not about, that school is not going to make or break your child. It also has a lot to do with you as a parent. It has a lot to do with the cultural influences you put in front of them. It has a lot to do with books. It has a lot to do with so much more. And also, not every high school is created equal, right? Like, not every school district, as you mentioned. Right. Not every private Christian school, whatever, is going to hold to the same principles or whatever. Not every homeschool is going to be run the same way. Some people have the passion for it, some don't, and their kids do languish because we thought it would be good. It turns out it wasn't, right? I just think that journey is so important to understand, too, in education. But, yeah, what do you guys think about that?
When you said that, it made me think of the colors. Like, okay, so let's say public school is green. But within the green color family, there are how many shades of green? Right. And I think that's the same way with private education, with homeschooling. It's not a one size and one model. There's so many different factors. So my first teaching experience was in a private school. Well, my very first teaching experience actually was in a bilingual intercity school, which was fabulous. I loved every minute of it. But again, all these experiences make you think of education, like bilingual education versus, only learn in English. And so, and then my first job out of college, that was my student teaching experience, was actually a Christian school in Buffalo, in the area of Buffalo. It was super difficult. And the reason was parents sent their kids, they paid the money for you to educate. And I felt like there was a whole lot of pressure in that private school, Christian school environment on the teacher to be the bulk of the child's education. And it was just very difficult for me. Now, here I am, however many years later, teaching again in a Christian school. I can see it as a parent. I can see it as, I have friends that send their children to the school I'm at now. And so there is, I think, an element of we're paying money for you to do our job or do a good job or so live up to our expectations, maybe. But there's also the idea that maybe private school is in a sense trying to remove their student from the culture of the public school experience. So at our school, it's a Christian school, but we have students who are not religious or Christian at all, which is another really interesting dynamic, right? So they're in our school because their parents did not want them in public education. So I feel like, again, if we're looking at colors, we've got this Christian school, blue, but there's such a spectrum of what's happening within that Christian school environment, which is a challenge as a teacher, teaching Bible to churchy kids who've grown up in the church, and then to a student who is there and has never even opened the Bible for himself. So, so anyway, that was my first experience teaching, and then moved into public education. I've never done the charter school. I do have my opinions about that, only because I've done interviews with charter schools as a teacher coming into North Carolina, and it wasn't necessarily positive. But I know a lot of parents who love their charter school. So, again, variety of shades of color within that one term of charter school.
Sure.
Yeah, I love what you're saying too about the parents setting expectations on the school to produce. That was one of the questions I was going to have: is should we as parents be expecting these institutions, assuming not homeschooling, right? You're sending them off to get educated one way or another, high school, or should we be expecting? What should we be expecting of them? Should we be expecting them to instill character, for instance? Should we be expecting them to produce some sort of result? I don't, like what are healthy expectations for education institutions versus, like you've already called out, like expecting them to do your job is not good. But what does that mean? Like what is a healthy expectation for a school? And when do you know, okay, they're not meeting that, and I should look at something different? Does that make sense what I'm saying? Because we do need to have some sort of expectations. Absolutely. What are they?
Right. Well, what is the teacher's job? I think that's the question. What is a teacher's job? Now, if you ask that question today versus 20 years ago, it's a completely different answer. And from a public educator standpoint, the public educator today is expected to do way too much. I mean, they are not the person who should be feeding the child, or making sure the child has clothes, or making sure the child has whatever. But I think, unfortunately, in public education, the teacher is more than a teacher. And the expectation just keeps getting piled onto the public educator. As far as...
You mean it's almost like the teacher is more of a social worker now, looking for resources? Is that...
I would say yes.
Yeah.
To be the emotional support for that child.
Yeah.
I think in some cases, not in all cases, in some cases, that teacher is the person of stability. Unfortunately, only for a year. But there's situations that the teacher needs to be that stability and embraces it, but at the same time, it's emotionally draining to have a classroom of 25 or 30 kids and trying to meet all of those needs. Now, we all know about Maslow's hierarchy.
We all do.
Yes, we do. But remind us who have maybe gotten rusty.
Maslow's hierarchy. You got to have certain things met before you can get to education, right? So if they're not fed, if they're not emotionally safe, all of these things need to be met before you can teach a child. So if a teacher's coming into a situation, knows that those things aren't happening,
there's no use trying to teach them.
Well, you try your best. And then the really bad part is at the end of the year, you're going to test these kids, and your success as a teacher is based on that score. Well, this kid didn't even come with food. So how am I supposed to teach this child if they're not well fed? But you're gonna make sure that my salary or my bonuses are going to be tied to my scores. There's so many things with public education, but
it's painful.
What is the expectation? What is the expectation of a public educator? I think is just to provide a safe environment for your child. Now, they're doing their best. I give the educator the benefit of the doubt. They're doing their best with the environment they have, with 25 kids that have all different needs. You're giving them an almost impossible situation to be successful with each one of those 25 kids. Think about your own kids. I mean, how you as a parent are trying to meet their individual needs.
Well, let me challenge that, not because I disagree, I completely agree, but how did they do in the one-room schoolhouses where they also had 25 kids, but their needs were even more varied than, I mean, I think Maslow's hierarchy, is that the thing we all know? Probably played a part, but I'd love to know.
I think the pressures weren't there then. I think the community was more involved then. I don't think the teacher was expected to be all things to every student. And I think there was an interconnectedness between the students. Yeah. Like, okay, if you're in 7th grade, you're going to come over here and help this first grader. And I think there was more of a community feel rather than the teacher do it all. But that's just a guess on my part.
That's great. I thought that was my immediate thought. Yeah. How'd they do it? And I think those are almost obvious, easy answers, but it's a good thing to think about. Yeah. You also talk about teachers given the responsibility of kind of that emotional support and even in some cases their needs, and yet we've stripped them of any ability to discipline. And like, how do you do that? Like, you're expected to emotionally support this kid, but you can't discipline them short of calling the parent and their parent saying, well, you got to fix that, you're the teacher. Right. Like, well, no. I've seen that in my daughter's, when she was in middle school. She did homeschool this last year. She might go back to high school this fall, but we basically pulled her out of the middle school because there wasn't the ability, we could see there wasn't the ability on the teachers and even principal side to do the discipline that we felt we needed to see to be able to trust them to educate our child. Because there was other children in the environment that were talking about death threat type stuff. And it's like, what are you going to do about it? Well, we've called the parents. It's like, okay, that's it? That's all we got? You know, and I'm not trying to cut them short or whatever. I don't know what all goes on behind the scenes. I just know that the ability to discipline has been shrinking every decade, while the expectations of what we want from them to accomplish has been increasing.
Well, that's a culture-wide reaction against authority. Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's just in the school system. We see it across the board. Yeah. Like, authority is not authority. We don't have a respect for authority. And then even within the school district, the child is right. Like, the parent is going to back his child, whether they're right or wrong.
That's what I was going to say. I feel like now, not only is that the way the kids feel, but that's also the way the parents feel. Like, the parent comes into the situation not giving the educator the benefit of the doubt, but coming in saying, how dare you do this to my perfect child who never does anything wrong ever. Right. And this is your problem, and you will not, and again, the educator's hands are tied, and so it's really tricky, isn't it?
And so unfortunately, we are losing many, many, many fabulous educators out of public education.
Yeah, because why would you do it?
Yeah, it's emotionally exhausting every day to walk into that situation and never know you're going to be supported, never know that the decision, that your education, your experience is not enough, and that you're going to be questioned. It's not worth it. Yeah, because I've been there. I've come out of public education, and to put your family, right, Mark, to put your family through the stress of coming home every day with all of that, because your brain never shuts off. The students are always in the back of your mind. Your lesson, and then we're not even talking about lesson planning. Like, every day you've got to have a full lesson ready to go. I mean, when do you do that?
Before you walk into the room.
Before you walk in the door, and it has to be
and
quality.
After you walk out of the room.
And then you walk out with papers to grade and, professional development that you need to finish for the district, and the job never ends. And so there's probably like 6 jobs within a teacher's job, but you're willing to have to perform all of them. So kudos to the public educators, because it is not easy, and I think it's getting more and more difficult. Yep. Yeah.
Shooey.
Justin's tired just thinking about it.
I'm worn out, emotionally worn out by hearing about their emotional struggles. Well, cool. Any other thoughts you guys have about early education? I think we covered it all.
We did pretty good.
We did it.
I'm going to give you another show notes link.
Great.
There's a great teacher, Tim Elmore. We used him at some parent educating events that we had at Generations Church. Excellent teaching. And it's not necessarily Christian teaching. It's like generational. This is what this generation is dealing with. As parents, this is the best way to, work with your Gen Xer or whatever. He's just has a lot of great resources.
Awesome.
Yeah.
No doubt.
Yeah, we're going to have a bunch of good resources in the show notes. We'll include a list of some of our favorite books, all four of us. I think that'd be fun. We'll also include a link to the reading list thing that Kelly mentioned earlier. What was it called?
It's a book. It's Honey for a Child's Heart.
Honey for a Child's Heart.
There you go. How
And
can you forget that? Come on, a title like that, you just can't forget it.
It really
Who doesn't want honey? Yeah, it sticks. Yes. Who doesn't want honey for their
clearly it
child's
didn't
heart?
stick. And then Tim Elmore, whatever that link is, I'd love to include that. And and then you were also mentioning there are reading tools to figure out and assess your child. Yeah, that'd be great to link.
Yeah.
So, a lot of good stuff we'll have for people. But,
Yeah, I think the big idea is parents, you have power, you have influence, you have control.
And you're your child's best teacher.
Absolutely.
Always. No matter where they are or what they're doing with their education. You are the best one.
Embrace it.
Yeah, and tangent or not really, but just think about even my kids in school and like the stuff they go through. Or you're right, like they bring home questions, they bring home stuff, drama with kids or whatever, and I could say, what's going on? I shouldn't have to deal with this because the school is supposed to be figuring out how to educate my children and make sure they have good social interactions and all that. But no, I feel like Mia homeschooled this year. We had to do way less educating for Mia this year because she did homeschool and she did the curriculum as Liberty Online. She handled that, almost didn't need a thing from us. Where the previous year was like we were helping not just with homework and kind of that stuff, but like a lot of just mental stuff, right? Like these kids this is happening, or the teacher is talking to us like this, and I'm not complaining. I'm saying what you said, Kelly, which is we still have to be part of their life. We still have to educate even no matter what education system they're in, it is our role to educate them. And then I also was thinking about books earlier. You're talking about certain books will have certain concepts in them, and I was thinking about like some books even have attitudinal problems, right? Like there's nothing wrong with the material, but like that's not how I want my kids to think it's okay to talk to adults, for instance. But like we have to continue to educate them so that they know when they come across those types of materials or whatever, that they come back to us and say, hey, what about this? Or they know, like, oh yeah, kids aren't supposed to talk to their parents like that. This kid is rude. And they know that reading the material on their own, in their room or whatever. Because we have to continue to educate and continue to be involved and be proactive.
And also, Justin, I know you're Stephen Covey, right?
Yeah.
You're a fan. So, beginning with the end in mind. I'm thinking about Mia's situation. What do you want her to be like as an adult?
Right.
Like, do you want her to be able to process all of these difficult situations? As helicopter parents, sometimes there's this feel that we want to make everything perfect, and we want to get all the failure out of their life. We want to make sure that they have the best influences. We want to make sure that everything is just right. But if you fast forward 10 or 15 years, is that what you really want for your child, who is now an adult? You want them to be able to process those things. You want them to know failure and that it's just a little bump in the road. It's not like the end of the world. So there were times in my children's experience that I wanted to make sure they got the right teacher. I wanted to control it.
Yeah, same.
And so I had to step back. There were moments I stepped back and said, okay, God, I'm just going to let you choose. And the teacher was not the teacher I would have chosen. But what did they learn that year? Other than the content of the classroom, they learned a whole lot more than I could have orchestrated. Yeah. And so I feel like we could go into helicopter parenting. That could be a whole nother episode. But anyway, that's another
That's so good.
Yeah. 10 years from now, 15 years, what do you want your child, what kind of adult do you want them to be?
Yeah.
And are you preparing them well for that?
That's good.
Yeah.
That'll preach.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love it, Chris.
Yeah.
I love it.
And as I'm thinking about, even our journey with Chris, that kind of thing, I was mindful again of how, God is in that process, and and yes, there will be fears, and yet, there is this opportunity to go forward, to be strong, courageous, to make the choices you need to make for your family. And it may not be the cookie cutter dynamic that fits for, the other people in your social group. You may be that parent,
Yep.
that we all think about. It's like, oh, well, the Pratts, they're a little sketchy, or that, but still, being able to do what you feel led to do as your child's parent. I think that's, that, and as Chris was saying, and I think it was more so early on, being able to build the foundation that our kids needed, because I'll admit, I think, as a Christian, I was a jerk sometimes, because I thought, here's this public educator, and they're trying to indoctrinate my child. And so I didn't handle that well at certain times, certain junctures, when we'd come, evolutionary versus creation, type dynamics, as we've just, podcast. But I also recognized too, it was a learning for me to be able to recognize there is a curriculum that sometimes teachers have to teach according to, and it's not that they can't add to it, but yeah, if they add, it just lengthens the school year. And they have so much that they have to teach that they can't necessarily add everything else. And for me, it was a learning to be able to say, okay, ultimately, my child needs to learn how to process these difficult dynamics. And like you were saying, we bring it home and we're able to talk about it and say, well, this is how I see it based on my perspective. And
what the Bible says. This is what the Bible says about this.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Mm-hmm.
And
teaching them how to think, not what to think.
How to think.
Because it's easy to just say, this is what you think. Like, this is what you're supposed to think. But they need to know how. Like, how do I take in information that might not align with what I believe? How do I take that in and process it and then come out the other end, like, with better understanding, like, and everything. Like, how do you think? How do you grow? Like, that's how they're going to grow.
And that's the antithesis to helicopter parenting, I think, is because, it really is. But you have to teach them that, because no matter how helicopter-y you are, stuff will leak into their vision, right? That you don't think they're seeing or experiencing, and they have to know how to think about that. And sometimes how to think about that is, I don't know what to think about that. And they come to you and you want to teach them. That's a valuable practice, right? Like, and I don't have all the answers either, but we can have a conversation, right?
Yeah.
But to think that you can protect them, you can put them in a bubble and keep them from all the things you don't want them to experience is unrealistic. You cannot prevent all. So you have to teach them to think, like how to think and how to process those things, and tell them, warn them, like, you're going to experience things I don't think that you should experience, and I won't know you are, but I want you to come back to me and have those conversations, and don't just depend on your perfect parenting and your perfect bubble and your perfect Christian school and and I'm talking about my own parents and my own upbringing. It's like, you thought you protected us from all this stuff, and yet stuff still leaks in because we're in the world, right? Like, it's part of our life. You can't,
Yes.
Yeah.
So many good thoughts. Yes.
Any closing thoughts, ladies?
No, just thank you for this opportunity. It's been a good conversation.
Yes.
It's been our pleasure.
Agreed. It's been good.
Yeah.
I think it's been a great insight into how we see it.
This is how we see it.
Hey, thank you for listening to our podcast. If you like how I see it, please do all the things that podcasts tell you to do. Subscribe, rate, review, follow us, and or talk nicely about us on social media. If you want to reach out, the email is us@howiseeit.click. Yep, I said .click, as in .click. Please tell your friends about this show, and we'll see you on the next one.